One day in June, many years ago, a lot of years ago, I went over to a friend's house and I'd never been there before. She and I were planning an all church party that was going to take place at her home in a few weeks. So she wanted to show me the layout of the place. But when I use the word house, that's really not a big enough piece of vocabulary to describe the gigantic home she lived in. She and her husband were both very successful in business, and they were from humble upbringings, and they had worked very hard to achieve their level of financial success. Now, she was a very down to earth kind of person, but her house was like nothing I had ever witnessed. If her house was, let's say, the Queen Mary, the place I lived in was like a rowboat. Her kitchen alone was larger than an average home and outfitted with enough appliances and cookware to feed an army. There was a theater room as large as a decent sized movie auditorium. Bathrooms were everywhere. Hallways led off into a library, a game room, a craft room, a home gym, and a man cave, of course, for her husband. I wouldn't have been surprised to have found a full service spa, complete with a massage therapist just waiting for me to show up. On and on it went. It felt like you could live in that place and probably go for about a month without ever encountering another person. Now, this couple had one teenage daughter, and I thought she could have her entire senior class over for a graduation party, including the marching band. I'm just trying to tell you, this place was big. So on this tour, my friend showed me one of the many living areas, and I noticed this pair of really tall double doors in the wall. So I asked her what was behind them, and she said, "Oh, that's the Christmas room." Well, I had no idea what she meant by that, so she opened the doors to this big space that was about the size of a bedroom, master bedroom. It had a very tall ceiling, the walls were lined with shelving, and every shelf was loaded with those big plastic storage containers filled with Christmas decorations. But the most striking feature was the artificial Christmas tree that was smack dab in the center of the room. It had to be at least 10 feet tall, and it was fully and professionally decorated. It was just complete. It was just sitting there. It's crazy. And this was in June, but here was this enormous Christmas tree, like something, I don't know, you'd see looking through a fancy home decorating magazine, the Christmas tree of the stars that no real child would ever be allowed to touch. I just stared at this thing with my mouth hanging wide open. She said, "Look, it's on a platform with wheels. We just roll it right out after Thanksgiving and we park it in the room over there and then we plug it in and the day after Christmas, we roll it right back in here where it stays for the rest of the year. It's so convenient. You know, decorating a tree year after year and then taking it all down again, that's a lot of work." All I could say was, "That's amazing." Now, I was happy for my friend that she had the ability to have a Christmas tree like that, ready to go at a moment's notice and not requiring any effort at all, especially if the date for Christmas ever changed. Will you be ready? Anyway, but all she had to do was roll it out and plug the thing in. I understood all of that, and if that made life better for her, well, that was just great. But to be honest, it also felt odd to me. Not wrong, but for some reason I could not quite put my finger on at the moment. It felt kind of sad, actually. I wasn't sad for her because she was clearly delighted by this Christmas tree, but I was imagining having that Christmas tree and a Christmas tree parking garage in my home where it would be stored 11 months out of the year. And for me, just speaking for me, that didn't feel quite right. And it took a while before I figured out why. And I realized that as a kid and as an adult, the process of putting up and then taking down a Christmas tree is a ritual that requires some effort, as most people know. A few weeks ago, I talked about the importance of rituals, about how we all need rituals and we all have them, large and small. But the Christmas tree ritual, putting it all together and then taking it all down, is really even more than that. It's a thing that we do that requires some effort. It takes work to get it done right, or the way that you need it to be done. And that work that you expend is not just part of the ritual. The time and the effort that you put into anything can and should bring you joy, or at least a sense of satisfaction for a job well done. Look at that tree. Look at how I hung that angel. It's the difference between going out and buying, let's say, a nice quilt and how you would feel about a quilt that you and maybe your friends had spent weeks quilting together from scratch. Now, that homemade quilt, that's going to feel so much better to snuggle underneath on a chilly night, and then to tell your grandchild one day, someday this quilt will be yours. Ah. It's the difference between buying an apple pie at the bakery and baking it yourself and getting yourself all covered with flour. Every bite of that homemade pie is going to taste so much better. You'll be remembering the process of kneading the dough, putting in the spices, all that stuff. So for me at least, it's joyful to put up a Christmas tree and stand back and admire all the work that it took. And it's also joyful to take it down, to have all the ornaments put away, to clean things up, and to stand back and say, well, that was great. The season for that has come and gone, and now on to the next thing, the next season, and whatever that might bring. I think it's very important to remember as we're transitioning from Christmas to the new year to appreciate all the work that we've done in our lives this past year, to take a moment and stand back and be grateful and joyful at what we've accomplished and what God has done in our lives. Even if some things that have happened were unplanned or they did not turn out as we hoped they would, we can still reflect and we can still be thankful for what we learned from those experiences. Because life is always full of surprises and challenges, many of them unpleasant. So why not, instead of lamenting those things, concentrate on and be grateful for how we responded to those things, how we grew from those experiences. And if you feel that you didn't respond well, then that's something to learn from in itself, and to be grateful that you learned that about yourself, because that's how we prepare ourselves for what's coming next. Contemplating the year that has just passed, rather than ever saying, phew, I'm glad that's over, maybe instead we should say, okay, moving forward, and unless I die, I will be moving forward in one way or another. But that said, moving forward, what did I learn from all that stuff this past year? And I think that's especially true during this time of COVID. Last year gave us some significant ups and downs, and they're still going on, that felt to me, at least, like I had very little control over big events that directly affected me and my church community and so many people I love and care for, not to mention the entire planet. So, how do you respond when life gets that weird and that uncertain? Do you curl up into a ball? Do you shake your fist in anger? Or maybe do you choose to dance with it? That might sound weird, because that's how it's often felt to me, as if I was being forced to attend dancing lessons and being required to master brand new steps just to keep up all the time. And the thing is, the dance steps, they kept changing right in the middle of the song. And when you're used to dancing in a certain way, you develop something that athletes call, we call muscle memory. That's where you've been practicing doing things in one way for so long, it just comes naturally. So hopefully you look very graceful out there on the dance floor. But for most of us, that's not been our experience of the world lately. We're having to learn a whole new dance routine that seems to change from week to week to week to week. So we're doing our best just to keep up and to learn something new. Now, in your own case, it might not have had so much to do with COVID. Maybe you've had a health scare, or you've lost someone very significant in your life. Maybe you're retired, or maybe you've had a baby. Maybe you've had to change the way that you work or go to school. So it's a good thing to think back on all of that and to appreciate the process, all that work that you did to manage those ongoing changes in your life. God knows at our church we've had to reimagine so many things about being a church, especially in a time like this. Being in a church that's focused on pursuing its purpose and pursuing its mission, but that refuses to curl up into a ball and that embraces the process and the hard, persistent work that we are doing together. We're learning new dance steps all the time. Sometimes our feet might get tangled up, but that's not a crisis. That's how we learn. And the process of the Christmas tree, because we know it's a temporary thing, is also a nice reminder for us that time is fleeting. And not to feel sad about that, but to appreciate the gift of the time we have and to be acutely aware of how we are spending that time. It takes effort to prepare to enjoy something that's truly worth spending our precious time doing. So, effort is worth the effort, and that's also joyful, whether it's putting up a tree, making a quilt, baking a pie, or learning new dance steps. Now, for me, I intend to embrace this new year with that in mind, and I hope that you do too. A new year, it isn't exactly like a blank slate waiting for us to fill it in. It's more like a tree that needs decorating, or a quilt that needs to be sewn together, or a pie that needs to be baked, or a new dance that needs to be learned. And what we should never forget is that our dance instructor in this class has been at this thing called life for a very long time. After all, God created it, created this life for us to live in joy, right in the middle of all the work that we have in front of us. But the effort is well worth the effort, because in each of our lives, the process itself is what brings us joy. That's what our holy instructor is teaching us in every life lesson ahead of us.